There are 7 types of fruit that most people over 60 still eat every single day, but they're quietly weakening your legs without you even knowing it. I know how that sounds. Fruit is supposed to be healthy, right? That's what we've all been told. And it's true for most of your life. Fruit was one of the best things you could eat. But here's what no one warned you about. The way your body processes sugar changes dramatically after 60 blank, and certain fruits, the ones loaded with fructose, are now doing more harm than good, especially to the muscles in your legs. I've seen this in my clinic more times than I can count. Older adults come in complaining about weak knees, unsteady walking, or legs that just don't feel strong anymore. And when I ask them what they eat for breakfast, 9 times out of 10, they say the same thing: a banana, a bowl of grapes, a big glass of orange juice. They think they're doing something good for their heart. But what they don't realize is that all that sugar is quietly breaking down the muscle fibers in their legs, thinning their blood vessels, and making it harder to stand steady. If you click away from this video right now, you might keep eating the very fruits that are making it harder for you to walk, climb stairs, or even stand up from a chair just a few years from now. But if you stay with me, I'm going to show you exactly which fruits to avoid, why they're damaging your legs, and most importantly, what you can eat instead to start rebuilding your strength. Before we go any further, don't forget to subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications so you never miss our best health advice. And I want to know if you're following along with this video. If you find this content helpful, type the number 1 in the comments. If not, type 0. Now, I want you to take a breath, because here's the good news. Nobody told you this before, but you can actually reverse what's happening. You can get your leg strength back. You don't need expensive supplements or complicated meal plans. You just need to change the way you choose and eat fruit. That's it. And in the next few minutes, I'm going to walk you through exactly how to do it. I'll reveal all 7 fruits you should be cautious about. And I'll give you 3 simple principles that can help you restore strength to your legs starting today. Let me explain what's actually going on inside your body when you eat too much of the wrong kind of fruit. Think of sugar like frost on a metal bridge. A little bit of frost? No big deal. But day after day, year after year, that frost starts to corrode the metal underneath. That's exactly what excess fructose does to your muscles. It causes something called glycation, a process where sugar molecules attach to proteins in your muscle cells and stiffen them. Over time, your muscle fibers lose their flexibility. They can't contract as powerfully. And the blood vessels that feed those muscles, they get damaged too. Less blood flow means less oxygen. Less oxygen means weaker legs. And here's the part that really matters. After the age of 60, your body doesn't metabolize fructose the way it used to. Your liver slows down. Your cells become less sensitive to insulin, so the sugar that used to get burned off quickly now lingers in your bloodstream longer, causing more damage to your muscles, your joints, and your circulation. This isn't about scaring you. This is about understanding what's happening so you can do something about it. Now, let me be clear. Not all fruit is bad. In fact, some fruits are incredibly good for you. The problem isn't fruit itself. It's the type of sugar inside certain fruits and how often you're eating them. Berries, for example, are fantastic. They're low in sugar and packed with antioxidants that actually protect your muscles. Grapefruit, also great. It helps regulate blood sugar and supports circulation. So the key here is knowing which fruits help and which ones hurt, and that's exactly what I'm about to show you. Let's start with two of the most common fruits that people over 60 eat every single day: bananas and grapes. I get it. Bananas are convenient. They're cheap, they're soft and easy to chew. And grapes? They're sweet, refreshing, and they feel like a healthy snack. But here's the problem. Both of these fruits are loaded with a combination of fructose and glucose that causes your blood sugar to spike fast and hard. When that happens, your pancreas releases a flood of insulin to bring your blood sugar back down. And over time, that repeated insulin surge does two things. It makes your cells resistant to insulin, and it tells your body to store fat instead of building muscle. Let me put this in perspective. A single handful of grapes can contain the equivalent of 6 teaspoons of sugar. 6 teaspoons. That's more than what's in a small candy bar. And because grapes are so small and easy to eat, most people don't stop at just a handful. They eat the whole bowl. Same thing with bananas. One medium banana has about 14 grams of sugar, and almost all of it is fructose. If you're eating a banana every morning with your coffee, you're starting your day with a sugar bomb that's quietly inflaming your muscles and weakening your legs. Now, I'm not saying you can never eat a banana or a grape again, but I am saying you need to be smart about it. If you want a sweet fruit, choose berries instead. Blueberries, strawberries, raspberries. They have antioxidants that actually fight inflammation, and they have far less sugar. Or try kiwi. Kiwi is low on the glycemic index and packed with vitamin C. The science here is simple. Less sugar equals less muscle inflammation. And less inflammation means stronger, steadier legs. Now let's talk about two fruits that have a healthy reputation, but can actually cause real problems if you eat them the wrong way: oranges and pineapple. You've probably heard that oranges are great for vitamin C. And they are. Same with pineapple. It's packed with nutrients and enzymes. But here's what most people don't know. Both of these fruits are highly acidic. And when you eat them on an empty stomach, that acid can irritate the lining of your digestive tract and trigger a low-grade inflammatory response throughout your body, including in your muscles. Pineapple contains an enzyme called bromelain. In small amounts, bromelain can help reduce inflammation. But when you eat a lot of pineapple, especially without any other food to buffer it, bromelain can actually irritate muscle tissue and connective tissue. And oranges? The acid in oranges can interfere with calcium absorption. Calcium is critical for muscle contraction. If your muscles aren't getting enough calcium, they can't contract properly, and that leads to weakness, cramping, and fatigue in your legs. There's clinical evidence for this. Studies have shown that high-acid foods, when eaten frequently and on an empty stomach, can pull calcium out of muscle tissue and bone over time. That's not something you feel right away, but after months and years, it adds up, and suddenly, your legs don't feel as strong as they used to. So here's my advice. Don't cut out oranges and pineapple completely. Just change when and how you eat them. Always eat them after a meal that includes protein like eggs, chicken, or Greek yogurt, or mix them with chia seeds or flax seeds to slow down sugar absorption. And follow this simple rule: 3 parts vegetables to 1 part sweet fruit. That balance will protect your muscles and keep your blood sugar steady. Let's move on to 2 fruits that have a perfectly healthy image, but are actually fructose-dense and surprisingly harmful to your legs: red apples and mangoes. I know apples are supposed to be the ultimate health food, right? An apple a day keeps the doctor away. And mangoes are tropical, delicious, and full of vitamins. But here's the reality. Both of these fruits are packed with fructose, and when you're over 60, your metabolism slows down significantly. You don't burn through sugar the way you used to. So when you eat a big apple or half a mango, all that fructose doesn't get used for energy. Instead, it gets stored as fat, especially around your thighs and calves. Think of it this way. It's like pouring the wrong kind of fuel into an older engine. The engine still runs, but it runs poorly. It sputters. It loses power. That's what's happening to your muscles when you eat too much fructose. Your muscles aren't getting the clean, steady energy they need. Instead, they're being flooded with sugar that your body can't process efficiently. And over time, that leads to muscle weakness, fat accumulation, and poor circulation in your legs. But again, I'm not telling you to give up apples and mangoes forever. I'm telling you to be smart about portion sizes and timing. If you want to eat an apple, eat half of it, not the whole thing, and pair it with a source of protein, like a handful of almonds or a spoonful of Greek yogurt. That protein will slow down the absorption of sugar and give your muscles the amino acids they need to stay strong. Same thing with mango. Eat half a mango, not a full one, and drink a glass of warm water with a pinch of sea salt before you eat it. The minerals in that salt will help your body process the sugar more efficiently and reduce the impact on your muscles. Now let's talk about the seventh fruit, and this one might surprise you because it's a summertime favorite: watermelon. Watermelon is sweet, hydrating, and refreshing. It's also one of the highest glycemic fruits you can eat. That means it spikes your blood sugar faster than almost anything else. When you eat watermelon, especially first thing in the morning, your blood sugar shoots up. Your pancreas releases a massive dose of insulin to bring it back down. And here's the problem. That insulin doesn't just lower your blood sugar. It also pulls glucose out of your bloodstream and stores it as fat. So your muscles end up starving for real. Usable energy. While your body is busy stuffing sugar into fat cells, I like to use this metaphor. Eating watermelon on an empty stomach is like flipping on a bright light switch and then immediately cutting the power. You get a quick burst of energy, and then crash. Your muscles are left in the dark, weak and confused. I see this all the time with older patients. They eat a big bowl of watermelon for breakfast, maybe with a cup of coffee, thinking it's light and healthy, but by mid-morning, they're exhausted. Their legs feel heavy. They can barely make it up the stairs, and they have no idea why. So here's what I recommend. Don't eat watermelon by itself. And definitely don't eat it first thing in the morning. If you want watermelon, eat it after a protein-rich breakfast: eggs, cottage cheese, smoked salmon, something substantial. That way, your blood sugar stays balanced, and your muscles actually get the fuel they need. And here's the most important thing to remember. You don't have to cut watermelon out of your life completely. You just need to change when you eat it. Timing is everything. Let me tell you about Mary Thompson. Mary is 70 years old, and she lives in a small town outside Columbus, Ohio. When I first met Mary, she could barely walk without holding on to furniture. She'd been using a cane for almost 2 years. Her legs felt weak, unstable, and painful, especially going up and down stairs. She told me she was terrified of falling, and honestly, I was worried about her too. So I asked her to walk me through a typical day of eating, and that's when I discovered the problem. Every single morning, Mary made herself a big fruit smoothie: banana, mango, a handful of grapes, some orange juice. She thought she was starting her day with something healthy and energizing. But in reality, she was flooding her system with sugar, and slowly destroying the muscle tissue in her legs. I explained to her what was happening. I told her that the fruit she was eating wasn't bad in and of itself, but the combination of high fructose fruits, eaten all at once, on an empty stomach, was causing her blood sugar to spike and crash every single morning. And over time, that pattern was weakening her muscles, damaging her circulation, and making it harder for her to walk. So we made some changes. We cut out the banana, the mango, and the grapes. We replaced them with a small handful of blueberries, and we added protein Greek yogurt and a scoop of collagen powder. We also made sure she was drinking a big glass of water with a pinch of sea salt first thing in the morning to hydrate her muscles before she ate anything. 3 weeks later, Mary called me. She said she couldn't believe it. Her legs felt stronger. She could stand up from a chair without pushing off with her hands. She could walk up a full flight of stairs without stopping to catch her breath. And she hadn't used her cane in over a week. Now, I'm not going to tell you this was magic. It wasn't. It was chemistry. It was her body responding to the right fuel at the right time. Mary's story isn't rare. I've seen this transformation dozens of times. Our muscles can recover at any age as long as we give them what they need. Hope isn't lost. It just needs better fuel. So now that you know which fruits to avoid, let me give you 3 simple principles that will help you rebuild leg strength and keep your muscles healthy for years to come. Forget the gym. Forget expensive supplements. Strong legs start in your kitchen. And these 3 rules will change everything. Principle number 1. Balance sugar with minerals. Every time you eat fruit, if your body uses minerals, especially potassium, magnesium, and sodium to process that sugar, if you're not replenishing those minerals, your muscles start to weaken. So make sure you're eating mineral-rich foods every day. Leafy greens, avocados, nuts, seeds, and a pinch of good quality sea salt in your water. Think of your muscles like a battery. They need a balance between charge, which comes from minerals, and fuel, which comes from protein. Without that balance, the battery dies. Principle number 2. Eat protein with every fruit serving. Never eat fruit by itself. Always pair it with protein. A handful of almonds, a spoonful of Greek yogurt, a slice of cheese. Protein slows down the absorption of sugar, stabilizes your blood sugar, and gives your muscles the amino acids they need to repair and grow. This one simple habit can prevent muscle loss and keep your legs strong. Principle number 3. Hydrate before 9 a.m. To reset muscle oxygenation. Most people are dehydrated when they wake up, and dehydrated muscles are weak muscles. So drink a big glass of water, ideally, with a pinch of sea salt and a squeeze of lemon within the first hour of waking up. This rehydrates your muscles, improves circulation, and prepares your body to process food efficiently. It's one of the easiest things you can do, and it makes a huge difference. These 3 principles are simple, but they work, and if you follow them consistently, you will feel stronger, steadier, and more confident on your feet. Now, I know some of you might be thinking, wait a minute, fruit is natural. How can something natural be harmful? And that's a fair question. So let me answer it clearly. Médecine dépend en dosage, even water, which is essential for life. It can be dangerous if you drink too much of it too fast. The same principle applies to fruit. Just because something is natural doesn't mean you can eat unlimited amounts of it without consequences. Fruit has been bred over centuries to be sweeter, bigger, and more convenient than it ever was in nature. A modern banana has twice as much sugar as a banana from 100 years ago. So yes, fruit is natural, but the amount we eat and the way we eat it is not natural. And that's where the problem comes in. Your body isn't failing. It's adapting. It's doing the best it can with the fuel you're giving it. But if you keep giving it too much sugar, too often, your muscles will weaken. That's just biology. The good news is that you have complete control over this. You can guide your body gently back to strength just by making smarter choices about what you eat and when you eat it. So now you know which fruits to avoid, you know why they're weakening your legs, and you know the 3 simple principles that can help you rebuild your strength safely and naturally. You don't have to feel unsteady anymore. You don't have to be afraid of stairs, or worry about falling, or feel frustrated every time you try to stand up. You can walk steady. You can feel strong. You can be proud of your body again. All it takes is one smart choice at a time. One better breakfast. One smarter snack. One glass of water with minerals in the morning. These small changes add up, and over time, they transform your life. If this video helped you, please share it with someone you care about. Share it with a parent, a friend, a neighbor who might be struggling with the same thing. Let's help each other rebuild our strength together. One meal at a time. And remember this, you're not weak. You're not broken. You're just one meal away from feeling steady again. Thank you for watching. Take care of yourself. And I'll see you in the next video.